Didn't want to sit next to me anymore.
That's not true. We want to have face to face. No, I'd want to
turn it to when I meet you.
hey, with the shake up and see to take either. So that,
Let's hear from us together. Yeah.
Well, good morning. We've got a very full schedule as usual. So thank you all for being here. Special thanks, actually, I want to put out to some of the committees who have done a fair amount of work actually between the last meeting and this meeting, especially the academics committee, E&I committee, and the external relations committee. So I want to thank those chairs for actually organizing those functions, but also for the support those around the table have actually given those committees between meetings. It's never easy when we have to get ready for these meetings, but on top of that, actually do some additional work, but incredibly important topics, and want to thank all that were involved in having those other occur. Should also say we have Megan Mobbs on the line, I believe. Megan, welcome. I'm sorry you couldn't join us here in person, but you've been doing some incredible travel and some incredibly important things. So welcome here this morning.
Thank you very much, sir. Appreciate that.
Good. And maybe what I'll also ask is if Kevin could just make a couple of comments just about some of the new technology and some of the things here in the room, just so everybody's aware of what how things are handled in meetings actually going forward. So that as well as any logistics, Kevin, you think we should be aware of?
Yeah. Good morning. Thank you, sir. Just so folks are aware, consistent with the board meeting, we are live streaming through our YouTube channel. There's new technology put in place, courtesy of Bill Wyatt's team in West Robinson. There's cameras around the room and there's sensitive microphones in terms of speaker and identifying who is talking at a particular point in time. In terms of additional awareness, materials in front of you, we have a couple additional handouts, the slide deck from today that we'll go through this morning. There's also a resolution that'll come to academics, athletics tomorrow, a manila envelope in advance of closed session. The last piece that I would call the schedule for the committee meetings immediately follow this meeting. We have our academic affairs actually in the Preston boardroom. So 2 floors up, there's an elevator at the back of the building, and then the closed set us get you up there as well. That's a change in location. Just want to make sure members are aware of. We shortened these 3 committee meetings by 15 minutes to accommodate the aquatic center dedication. So there's going to be a bus in front of Preston and a bus in front of Smith Hall to get our board members over to the aquatic center. Anything else, sir?
No, I think that covers it. I think, again, so people will get transportation right from the committee meeting down to the aquatic center.
Yes, sir. That's right. Expected to start at noon.
Great. Anything else from anyone before we get started with the formal part of the meeting? If not, I think the first formal piece of business actually was to approve the minutes. So can I have a motion to approve? Second. Second. Any questions or comments? None, all in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? They stand approved. So, Cedric, without further ado, I'll pass things over to you and the team. I know you've got quite a few people participating in this discussion. Excellent.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. President, and welcome back, board members, to Virginia Military Institute. For our guests and spectators and other folks, thanks for being here, as well as anyone who's listening on live stream, to include yourself. Megan, good to have you here and by way of video. I'm going to run through a number of topics just to kind of hit the main tops. There's a number of, if you look at your agenda, there are a number of topics that we will cover in a little bit more detail. And certainly as we break out into the committees, there will be more in-depth briefings that will occur as well. The mention about the live stream, we wanted to make sure we let that be known up front. And obviously our meeting started with last night's XCOM with the board president, our VPs, and our various committee chairs. So we are off and running here over the next 2 days to get through a lot of topics and a lot of information to make sure that the Board of Visitors is informed. As was mentioned very briefly, later today, we'll do the Aquatic Center dedication. We are very, very pleased to have with us Mr. Dick Goodall, who will participate in the Aquatic Center dedication, along with a number of other folks there in attendance. The first thing I'd like to talk about is just we had a December graduation. I'd like to thank Gussie Lord for being our commencement speaker, where we graduated 23 cadets. They were 5th-year cadets, one 3.5-year cadet who graduated and received their degrees 6 of them commissioned, 5 were Army commissionees, and 1 was a Navy commissionee. We are off and running in terms of the activities that you would normally expect here at the Institute. I certainly believe that to a large extent, the cloud of COVID is behind us, although we have had a number of COVID cases here recently, but not near as impactful on the day-to-day activities that go on here on post. Also back on 11 November, we had the Founders Day celebration, gave us an opportunity to recognize General P and award him as our 14th superintendent, the New Market Medal. I think by all accounts, that was a wonderful event, and it's in keeping with the standards of the Institute to not only recognize that particular day, but recognize I believe our second longest superintendent. This year, we've already gotten off and running with the various different speaking engagements that occur over in the Leadership Center, starting with the 13th Annual Leadership and Ethics Conference, which is put on by Colonel Dave Gray and his team. This year's topic, the theme was titled Principled Dissent, Navigating Moral Challenges, where we had a very, very powerful lineup of speakers from a full range of occupations just to talk about that topic of principled dissent. We had General Robert Neller, the former Assistant Commandant of the Marine Corps, Rachel Dolander, who was the first gymnast to publicly speak out against Dr. Larry Nassar. We had Erica Chung, who is the Executive Director of Ethics and Leadership, who was the key whistleblower in the Theranos case. And so all of those folks had an opportunity to come here and engage with the Corps, engage with other members of the VMI family to hear that presentation. And it was a wonderful 2-day event, I believe it was. Very, very powerful. I thought it went off very, very well. My hat's off to Dave Gray and his team for putting on such a fine event. We have recently this week, we had Braver Angels Debate Training, where VMI has been selected as one of 10 universities to be part of a community of practice to foster civil discourse and to participate in research that's funded by the John Templeton Foundation. Colonel Valentina Dmitrieva Grazel is the faculty fellow, and she was supposed to have joined us last night. I don't think she was there, but she's going tonight for dinner, so she'll join us tonight. I'm sorry. I think the last thing was the most recent thing. Our 31st annual VMI Sports Hall of Fame, which took place last Saturday, where we inducted 10 new members into the VMI Sports Hall of Fame. That ceremony, we were also joined by about 30 prior inductees, to include the man sitting right, our very own board member, Gene Scott. And there are about 300 people that were in attendance, and it was a very, very good event as well. And again, just to have people coming back to the post, to have the opportunity and engage, that's very important for our Corps, so that they have an opportunity to talk to members of these various different groups, to learn about their successes after VMI and to learn a little bit and hear some stories about how their cadetships went. So that was pretty impressive as well. Moody Hall, pleased to announce that Moody Hall is back open. As a matter of fact, we had the dinner in there last night. It officially opened back up on 7 January after being down for some months due to some mechanical issues, and then the need to do some remediation, mold remediation and investigation. We've spent about $1 million over recent years in doing maintenance and upkeep of Moody Hall. And just to give you a perspective of what we had to make as an investment to bring Moody Hall back up, we've invested here over the last few months $110,000 to replace the stairs that were in much needed repair. $250,000 just to replace the chiller and the controls that had to be manufactured because old contractor who provided the capability many years ago is no longer in business. So we had to spend about $250,000 on that. About $50,000 on mold remediation, all to bring Moody Hall back up and get it in an operational state. I think I say all that to say that is why we are on a path to work with the legislature where we've already secured funding in order to do the deliberate design and planning, but with the idea that once that's done and we've got a set of approved plans to secure funding to build a new hall. Moody Hall is over 50 years old, and the sustainment, the maintenance, and the restoration that occurs year over year is now beginning to increase. So I believe that if you're looking at its useful life, it certainly has fulfilled its useful life. And if we have an opportunity to go and build a more expansive Moody Hall that will support the growth of our alumni base and the growth of our core and the activities that go, I think now's the time to do it. On the athletic front, Jim Miller, who's here today, he will introduce us to our new head football coach, Danny Rocco. You'll have an opportunity to meet him, and Jim will discuss more about Danny and his resume and what he's done since he's arrived here on post with new recruits and a new coaching staff. A couple of things that we've been working on from the government relations front. Governor Northam has come in and had, I'm sorry, I stand corrected. The governor has come in and he has established a set of priorities and focus areas that he has for his administration. There are a couple of areas. One is this idea of free speech and free inquiry. I meet routinely with the other college presidents that are part of the public institution and the community college system. And we framed and developed a collective statement on free speech that was sent out by the board members and consistent with the dialogue that's been going on with Governor Youngkin about free speech and free inquiry. In addition to that, we've gone back into our general order that covers VMI's policy on free speech and did an update on it. VMI has had a long-standing policy about free speech and free inquiry. So there's really nothing new there, but we went back and went through a more deliberate process to develop some first principles that helped us frame a new statement on free speech and free inquiry. And as you might imagine, VMI's statement on free speech and free inquiry probably looks a little different because of the nature of us as a military college than some of the other public colleges that are in the Commonwealth. Nonetheless, we have a statement on free speech and free inquiry that clearly articulates that the Institute is supportive of and will do all that it can to allow for the free expression and the free speech of every individual who is a part of the VMI family and who desires to speak here. Jim will talk a little bit about an initiative that we have going relative to the Academic Achievement Fund initiative for NCAA athletics, which is a fund that has tentatively been approved, which would allow for a stipend of sorts to be provided to some of our athletes. Jim will go into that in detail so that you know it's consistent with NCAA rules, it's consistent with Southern Conference rules. And again, it kind of goes to my theme that as VMI continues to pursue efforts in NCAA Division I athletics, we don't need to hamper ourselves by creating a tougher set of rules for us to operate under, over and above what the NCAA allows and what the Southern Conference allows. So Jim will talk about that. Admissions update, we'll talk about, and you'll get a brief here shortly from a number of people with respect to our admissions stance right now. The first will be a briefing that is a result of some independent work that I requested and got this aid of two of our faculty to kind of give us kind of a broad brush view on how we stand and how we look and how long we've been challenged by our admissions and enrollment that hit us pretty hard this academic year with the lower than expected enrollment of 375 matriculants. And then our new admissions director and financial aid director, Joe Hagee and Shannon Escom, they will talk about where we are right now and some of the things that we're doing to get us through this campaign to be able to seat 450 or 450 plus rats in this next upcoming academic. The weekly admissions report, I believe that you all probably have it in your folder. I would just tell you in general, what it's beginning to show is that despite the kickoff of the efforts by the admissions team, we are starting to see positive movement in a lot of different areas with the number of applicants, early applicants, the number of appointments that have occurred, and the number of deposits. And also overall in our applicants, while those numbers still remain negative compared to point in time data from last year, those numbers are decreasing. That has been aided by a lot of effort by a lot of people across the entirety of the Institute, to include faculty, to include our cadets, to include the admissions team that is now getting themselves back up to speed in terms of their numbers and being led by Joe Hagee. The strategic plan, Dallas Clark will give us a quick update on the ongoing efforts to develop a strategic plan. We had a offsite that took place 2 weeks ago in Richmond, where we brought a team together that are leading our efforts in the development of a strategic plan based on 4 focus groups. The first is a military focus group. The second is an academic focus group. The third is an athletic focus group. And the fourth is a cultural environmental focus group that is being led by Keith Gibson. And so Dallas is going to give us an update on that and the work that's been going on with, in collaboration with a contract team from the PMG group that comes out of the Douglas Wilder School at Virginia Commonwealth University. Very adept at helping colleges develop strategic plans. On the government relations front, again, Kim Parker is our government relations lead. We have forward deployed Kim, and she is in Richmond doing the day-to-day hooking and jabbing with legislature. And we were in Richmond. I had the opportunity to go with Kim and Dallas and make a lot of office calls and visits of members of the legislature as well as members of the Senate to talk about VMI's submission, budget submission for this year, as well as some other legislative language that we are fighting to get adjusted and modified in support of our efforts to continue to work. The specific legislation that I'm referring to is the legislation on what we've termed as the Helmer bill, which is Dan Helmer, who has pursued legislation with respect to sexual assault, sex crimes, where immunity is granted to a young man or young woman who's a victim or a witness or bystander who reports if they were under the influence of drugs or alcohol, then all of the public colleges and VMI as well would grant immunity for that infraction in order to go after the more heinous crime of the sexual assault or the sex crime. So we've been working on that for a while, and we've still got some more work to do. But it's been real good discussions with Dan Helmer, and I think we'll get to the finish line of this legislative cycle. Look at my time, because I told my team I was going to be on time, and I'm actually ahead of schedule. So with that, stop. See if anyone has any questions of me, and if you don't, then we'll move into the start of the series on a number of areas. We're going to do one on analysis, and then Joe Hagee and Shannon will come up and talk about admissions and financial aid posture as we see it right now. Bob Moreshi will come in and talk about an academic update. Dallas Clark will cover finance and support, as well as an update on the strategic plan efforts. Our Commandant will give us an update on how the Corps is doing. Jim Miller will touch update, and then we'll have kind of a special presentation, very short, from our Career Services Director, Lieutenant Colonel Ahmad Sheikh. Subject to any questions.
Megan, anything from you?
Did you want Dallas to do the General Clark to do the strategic plan brief?
Up front?
Yes, sir.
You ready?
Sir, Lee Rakes has actually joined us, so I'm going to
Okay.
let Lee come and run the briefing.
All right. Come on up, Lee. Or at least you're going to have to move a little closer to the table so the mic.
Good morning.
Morning.
Really? How are you? Good, thanks. Is there a clicker there? Yeah.
Morning, how are you?
Good. I'll keep this as brief as I can. I know we have an awful lot to cover. This was a slide that's provided to you in the last briefing. It's just kind of an overview of the process. Briefly, we organized into 4 groups, 4 focus groups, as the superintendent has discussed, with the purpose of discussing a lot of information, internal, external, review, strengths, weaknesses, those sort of things. And then there, we wanted to have those sessions were to lead to this retreat that we had last week. So let's put it all together and make sense out of this and determine some priorities, get consensus. And so that's where we are right now. And we set out to deliver 5 main strategies. We've come up with about 6, and we'll cover that briefly. So the focus groups, again, as the superintendent discussed, were academics, athletics, open environmental. Academics led by the dean, athletics led by the director of intercollegiate athletics, military led commandant, cultural and environmental, Colonel Keith Gibson and William Fulton, coach. Executives in these focus group chairs got together, had a discussion of VMI's mission, vision, and values. That in just a second. Examine again internal, external strengths and weaknesses. PMG, Performance Management Group, the group that we contracted with, conducted a stakeholder survey. That survey went out to all alumni, had the opportunity to participate in it. All cadets had the opportunity. Parents had the opportunity to participate in that, as well as faculty and staff at VMI. Focus groups also conduct environmental scans. So they were doing their own research and seeing what's going on in the external environment. And then they were asked to generate reports of findings. They'll come up with recommendations to say, here's what's going on, and create an argument based on what you've come up with. That was summarized into a SOAR analysis, just like SWOT. The A stands for aspirations, the R stands for results, so it's a little more results focused. And you can see sort of the themes that came out of that here on the right-hand side. Academics, determining if the curriculum and other educational opportunities prepare cadets for the workplaces of the future.
athletics, supporting overall well-being of cadet athletes and securing additional funding for operating capital projects. Military, providing premier leadership development opportunities for all cadets to produce honorable citizen soldiers. And then culture and environment, supporting the overall well-being of all cadets and modernizing institute infrastructure. Okay, so the stakeholder survey was a part of this. The key themes here: keeping VMI affordable, providing academic support, services, and leader and character development programs to cadets, improving VMI's ability to recruit and retain an outstanding faculty from a national pool, ensuring the class and regimental system and the RAT line provide opportunity for leadership and personal development, and ensuring that all members of the VMI community are treated fairly and respectfully. Okay, I won't read on it. It's just to say that vision change. I didn't put the whole mission up here just for the purpose of brevity for this slide. Vision, no change with what's in the current strategic plan, what our current vision is. Values, Colonel Gray did an outstanding job leading senior executives and other key leaders across the Institute in a workshop where we discussed what the values of the Institute should be, and this is what the group came up with. Courageous, disciplined, honorable, resilient, selfless service, and strives for excellence. So that got us to the retreat. So as part of that, we had an admissions and enrollment brief by Colonel Sten and Major Murray, and Strategic Enrollment Management Committee activities briefed by Colonel Wyatt. He co-chaired that committee along with Colonel Jan Battaglia. They've been doing a lot of work in that space. So although they were not necessarily part of the 4 focus groups as originally organized, the work they were doing is integral to strategic planning, and we felt that they had to have a voice in this, and they had to come and present what they had been working on because we knew it was going to be a priority for the Institute moving forward. Reports of the findings and the SOAR analyses were briefed by each of the focus group chairs. And then we did have an opportunity to get a brief from the Virginia Secretary of Education, Amy Gadara. Many thanks to Ms. Chambers and Mr. Scott for coming and having dinner with us that night. 2 outstanding human beings who joined us there with little notice. So thank you for that. So with all of this, now we've got all of this information out there. PG said, okay, let's put you into breakout groups, work this information, condense it down, get to some consensus, and come up with some strategic priorities. Okay. We have 6 new draft priorities. So first, leadership, execute the premier leadership development experience in the nation to prepare cadets and members of the VMI community to lead effectively in the 21st century. There's an awful lot of consensus, at least among those participating in the retreat, that was the right #1 priority, the keystone priority. Finances, implement a long-term financial plan that increases revenue generation, reduces business, and seeks new funding sources for operations, financial aid, and infrastructure monitoring. Increase cadet enrollment through enhanced enrollment infrastructure, targeted recruitment strategies, strategic use of financial aid resources. And then with that, work to improve success and enhance academic support and other high impact practices so that we're not only bringing them in, but we're working to retain more cadets and then graduate them so that they are successful. Educational programming, ensure appropriate curricular programs, majors, training, and skills to produce graduates who excel in the 21st century workplace. Physical environment, provide necessary physical environment and infrastructure to support current proposed programs. And then well-being, commit to the overall well-being of the VMI community, focus on enhancing the physical and mental health and daily life of the core cadets, faculty, staff, and engendering pride with the purpose. The idea here is to engender pride, purpose, for all members of the VMI community. Next steps. So again, this is a draft. We need to work up some goals and objectives and corresponding metrics to accompany these strategic priorities. From there, we're coming back to you. So between now and your May meeting, we will get this information to you, get your feedback, and then make any necessary adjustments to the strategic plan. We'll work on finalizing the plan, and then we'll work to get it to you in May for approval. Then we will publish and disseminate the plan, create a new strategic planning website. With that, any questions?
Just to clarify, PMG's role was not to tell us what, give us their opinions about what, was more to manage the process and facilitate the discussion. Is that the right way to think of it?
That's exactly right. They are facilitators. They are facilitators. They just say, hey, you tell us, you're the stakeholders. We go out, we can tell you what others are hearing, but we're going to facilitate you to consider. That is the idea.
Mike, so what's the target date for the draft?
Great question. We hope to have it sooner rather than later. So my goal would be terrible, but you love some specifics right now. I think we can work this by March. General Clark? Yep. We're going to try to have it by March, and then we know we're going to need time to work it from there. Man. Other questions?
Really?
All right, good morning. My name's Major Tim Murray, and I'm just,
Can you project a little louder? It's really hard to hear back here.
yeah, sure. Can you hear me? Is that better?
Yes, man.
My name is Major Tim Murray, and I'm an assistant professor of economics here at VMI. And over the last few months, my colleague Tinny Sen and I have been working on an admissions project where we have collected data from a variety of departments across post to try to look at admissions from a holistic standpoint, understand what's some of the trends, identify some of these key things, and maybe is there something we can learn about what we have done to inform us going forward. Before we move on, though, I just want to, there's some people in the room here that have been very instrumental to helping us along the way. Just want to acknowledge there. Luke Anderson, Christy Elliott, Lieutenant Colonel Shannon Escom, Tristan Jiang, Ian Schlegel, and Colonel Wes Robinson were all very helpful as far as acquiring data, providing data storage, and securing it so that we were able to analyze it. We valued greatly from conversations with Lieutenant Colonel Joe Hagee, Colonel Janet Battaglia, and General Moreshi to kind of get a sense of idea as faculty. We work with the students on a basis, but just get a sense from the administrative side, from the admissions, understanding the admissions process, that's really helped kind of the direction in some of these questions. So what we're going to do is basically go back a decade and kind of look at enrollment for the last decade, So what we're going to do today is four things. We're going to look first at a profile of the applicants and matriculants to VMI, talk a little bit about who's coming to VMI. We'll talk about some recruitment strategies that we've done in the past and look at those. We'll talk briefly about financial aid and what that's looked like over the last decade, and then offer some concluding thoughts and for going forward. This graph here is, I think, one of the most important graphs here because it kind of informs where we're at today. Trend over the last decade. So what we have here is the number of applicants and matriculants and admitted students that we've had since 2010. So what you'll see is the blue line at the very top is the number of applications that have been started. Right? This is the number that is reported on the VMI website. But what we have analyzed for this report was the red line. So the blue line includes applications that are started but not actually finished and submitted. So the red line subtracts out the incomplete applications and only looks at applications where they were completely submitted with all supporting documentation to VMI, and then the admissions department made a decision. Right. So this is a operationally important. So this is the number for our presentation to focus on, and you can see that this number has been declining for about a decade. Right, and we're at a point where this year where the number that we actually received is smaller than the number of students that we've admitted over the last decade. Right, so the green line shows the number of students that VMI admitted, and we are at a point this year that if we just look at the fully completed applications, we almost admitted everybody that applied. Right, and so when we got to the point where we had low matriculant numbers, we didn't have the ability to dip into a larger pool to admit more students to be able to come. So what we see is that over the last, since 2012, there's been about a 50% decline in applications that were completed. And we know that, we didn't have graph in here just for brevity, but this decline is largely due to decline in applications from men. And this follows a national trend. So over the last decade, there has been a decline of men just going to college in general. And VMI is victim to that trend, as every other college is. This trend, though, is slightly larger for VMI than it is for other schools. And so what we're going to do is look to try to, the rest of this presentation, look at what does what does matriculants look like? What does the applications admissions process look like? To try to understand how did we get to 96% of those that completed an application. So this graph here shows by year the number of students when they applied, what their first choice of major was in their application. So when students apply to VMI, they select their first major that they would like to go into, and if not, they go with the second choice major that they would go into. And so this graph here shows year by year how many students were applying to those majors, and we see that there's consistently 3 majors that are the most popular. It's the mechanical engineering's typically number 1, economics, business, and international studies are 2 and 3, and consistently year after year. And so just from a demand standpoint, what are the people that are applying to VMI? What majors do they want to go into? I think it's important to just kind of know from the demand side, what is it that they offer, so then we can think about this from a supply side. So this next slide, what we did is we worked with the Office of Institutional Research to get data on a group of students that VMI admitted but chose not to come, right? So if you looked at the first slide, there was the green line that showed but we didn't get that number of students that matriculated. So we wanted to try to understand what could we learn from the group that VMI admitted it but chose to go to a different school. So what we did is for each year of the last 10 years, we looked at what were the top 10 schools that our competitors chose, right? And each year there's different schools in that top 10, but what we found is a common theme that there are 6 other military colleges that consistently show up year after year in the top 10. Right, and that is the Citadel, Virginia Tech, Norwich University, Texas A&M, the Naval Academy, and Marion Military Institute College. Other schools that commonly showed up here as well are James Madison, UVA, Penn State, and Northern Virginia Community College were other common schools that also show up in this field. But the big 3 are Virginia Tech, the Citadel, and Norwich University. Every single year, the exception of 2020, where the Naval Academy, those were the top 3 schools where students that VMI admitted, those were they went to. So we thought this was important because it means that those students that are not coming to VMI are still seeking a military type education, right? So it's that the military education that we offer and the culture that we offer at VMI is still in demand and still valuable. So you can go to the next slide. So we can't really know exactly why a student didn't come to VMI unless we actually administer detailed surveys, but we can just kind of look at what other data was out there. And one of the things that we wanted to look at was what were the majors that students that colleges chose. And to try to understand, maybe is there something that we don't offer that we could offer that they're seeking? What we found is that 30% of all of the students that went to one of these 6 military colleges over the last 10 years chose to be an undecided major, right? So that is, they went into the school without declaring a major, right? And so that's not something that VMI currently allows. So we thought that was interesting, not something we expected to find. So then if you look at the next 3 majors, or the next couple majors that are right underneath undecided, they're right in line with our most popular majors: mechanical engineering, international studies, economics, and business. So, there's a theme there of those are the most in-demand majors, but this undecided major was something that was interesting that we found. So one of the things that we, when we look at this, if we want to increase the number of students that are coming to VMI that are admitting, if we admit more students into our most popular, most in-demand majors, it might be one way in which we can increase enrollment at VMI. So this might mean that we need to.
Can I ask a question?
Sure.
I'm sorry, it's been bugging me since the slide was up there, and I'm just wondering if the Naval Academy just jumped out to me. Like it came out of nowhere and took a huge percentage, and then it looks like they're being a little sticky. Did you have any insight on what happened there?
No, so we aren't able to, it was interesting when we looked at it because it was all of a sudden in 2020, it's like a bunch of people that applied to VMI went to the Naval Academy, but prior to that, there's almost nobody. So that was interesting. We didn't dive into the specifics any further than that though, but it's over the last 3 years. Yes, sir.
Question on the undecided.
Yes.
Some schools don't allow you to pick a major when you're going in. Does that skew that data?
For these 6 colleges, not that I was aware, when we broke it down by individual college, there were students that did select majors. Like, for example, the Citadel, is the most popular major for incoming freshmen at the Citadel is not undecided. It's in the top, it's pretty high, but it is not the top choice. So it's when you look at Norwich, Virginia Tech, Texas A&M, right, those are larger schools that have, right, a military college that is in a subsection of their larger student body. But the Citadel and Norwich did have undecided was up in the top 5, but it wouldn't be the number 1. So, but we're thinking about that, right? So when we think about increasing enrollment, giving resources to our most popular majors to allow them to have more students is one way in which we might be able to increase enrollment. And that might mean changing the right sizing model, changing the allocation of faculty resources. But because we noticed that, these other 6 military colleges are common, go to the next slide, we think it's we recommend exploring what it is they have to offer, particularly with, how they facilitate the undecided majors coming in as a freshman. Since other military colleges offer this, it's not something that's necessarily infeasible for VMI to consider. So it's possible that, some students we admit, right, if you want to go to get a military experience, you're applying to Virginia Tech, you're applying to you're applying to Norwich. And if you get into VMI, you get into one of the other schools, and VMI says choose a major, and the other school says come in, you can wait a year and figure it out. That might be a deciding factor, right? We obviously don't know that for certain, but it's just something to think about that, especially as VMI, after we have the new strategic plan, as we revisit the core curriculum and the academic side, it's something I think worth exploring as an option going forward. So next, what we're going to do is look briefly at recruitment at VMI over the last few years. So this graph shows a heat map of the state of Virginia as to where students have been applying from and where they have matriculated from. So the darker the color, it's the darker the more people have come from that place. So on the left is a graph that shows where we've, since 2007, where we've gotten applicants from, and on the right, where we've gotten matriculants from. And you'll see that for large parts of the state of Virginia, we haven't gotten many matriculants from over the last, since 2007. So, but I want you to focus on this map really quickly before we move on to the next slide, so you can kind of have an idea of where we're getting students from, so then we can look at historically where we've been recruiting from. You can move to the next slide. So this next slide shows year by year over the last 4 years, the number where VMI went to visit high schools in specific counties. So a gray county means that there were 0 visits to a high school. So over the last 2 years, VMI didn't in-person visit any one of these high schools. And the 2 years prior to that, even this is before the pandemic, we've seldom went to a lot of these high schools. So this is when we look at where we're getting students from and where the admissions office has in the past has gone, it's important to say that this is an issue, right? We're not actively out recruiting students. Move to the next slide.
So truth in lending, go back. Truth in lending, we do know that at least 2 of the years where you're showing the gray was affected by COVID, where a lot of high schools denied those types of activities going. Just so we understand.
Yeah. So 2018, 2019, I mean, I know where I live in Virginia, they visited the high schools in our county because I met them. So I don't dispute charts. Maybe it wasn't good, but
What county?
It's in the white.
County.
it's gray.
What county?
Rudder. It was gray visits. Ray is not a visit.
Yeah, so all we have is the data that was provided. If there's a, if there's a record keeping error that's,
No, I
yeah.
get that. I understand. And I know that the slides, when during COVID, they didn't visit because I was in touch and it just didn't happen. So just, interesting. Thank you.
Yeah, yes. Move to the next slide. This table here shows the 15 most populous localities in the state of Virginia. And since 2007, what percent of our applicants and matriculants have come from these counties? So what you'll notice here for this is that for a lot of our large population centers within the state of Virginia, VMI has gotten relatively few applicants and matriculants. And so we think that this is an untapped area as to where VMI can look for more. Next slide. So this is there's a pattern here that we've seen that, of making sure that we are aggressively going out to visit high schools and making sure that we're going out to visit the places, two places. One, where we historically we've had success in the past for getting applicants and matriculants, making sure that we are consistently visiting those places to get as much out of them as we can. And then two, there's a lot of new untapped markets that we haven't visited in the past, particularly in Hampton Roads and Northern Virginia. Right. So these are two of the larger metropolitan areas in the country, and we don't historically get a lot of applicants from those two places. Hampton Roads, in particular, right? There are a number of military installations in Hampton Roads. Right. There's the largest naval base in the world there. There's Fort Eustis. So there's a lot of, I grew up in Hampton Roads. It's a huge military community there. And so as far as making that as a target, right, if we want to create new pipelines of students, making sure that we're aggressively targeting that area is one place where we might be able to find some success in the future. It's a place that we haven't historically visited. Move on. So this next slide shows the budget, the portion of the budget historically of the Office of Admissions that were dedicated towards recruitment. This is about a third of the budget that they spend. And what you'll look at is that there's two things I just want to highlight on this chart. The majority of the budget historically has been spent on external marketing. And you'll notice that there's very little funds that have been spent on media services, travel, and career fairs, right? So we can move on to the next slide. What we did is we further dove into the budget data to look at it and found that most of that external marketing goes to a company called EAB Consulting. So this company is, from what we understand, is a company that we buy lists of students from. And so we spend hundreds of thousands of dollars a year on this company to give us lists of students, while at the same time we've had a decline in the number of completed applications that have been to VMI. So we recommend looking at, what is it that we're spending? What are we actually getting from this company? And is there a better use of that money internally? Can we dedicate it to, more aggressive in-person recruiting efforts? Launching a modern digital strategy. And so just something to really think about on for recruitment. And before we move on, I want to note this isn't an indictment on the current, Lieutenant Colonel Hagee, who's new, who wasn't here for any of this. In conversations we've had with him, he's also in his own, independent of us, found a lot of these things and working to overcome it. But it is important to look back at the past to understand what have we done well, what could we have done better so that we can make a better strategy going into the future. You can move on to the next slide. So next, we're going to briefly talk just about financial aid over the last decade. So VMI gets financial aid from, students get VMI get financial aid from a number of sources, right? Athletics, ROTC, there's merit scholarships, but we're going to focus today just on the main scholarships that come from the VMI Foundation. So what this graph here shows is the green bar shows the amount of money that was budgeted from the foundation to VMI to award in these scholarships. The purple line shows the amount of money that was actually spent, and the blue bar shows the amount of scholarship funds that were left unspent in each year. And so first, I think we can ignore the current year because they're currently in the process of awarding all that money out. So you may see that big blue bar this current year. It's because they're currently awarding that money out. But if we look back at the previous years, what you'll notice is that there is a significant amount of funds that are left unspent each year. Hundreds of thousands of dollars in many years of money that could have been doled out to an incoming student that may have convinced them to come here. It could have been given to a current student that would maybe incentivize them to stay. So I think it's important to look at this. So we understand that part of the issue here is that there are restrictive MOUs from some of the scholarship found that have been donated, right? And so when we went through and looked at the data in granular, we were able to identify a number of scholarships that have not, that are some of substantial value that have never been awarded over the last 10 years. Some that have been substantially unawarded. And so one of the things we recommend is revisiting some of the donors to try to see if they can maybe make revisions to the MOUs so that if, for example, you donate a scholarship that's only going to a chemistry student, but there isn't a chemistry student that meets this criteria available, maybe there's somebody else that we can make sure these funds get awarded. Another thing that's important here is the timing of financial aid, right? So right now, the foundation gives money at the end of the fourth quarter based on a 3-year rolling average. And so that money that we have available currently comes in sometime in the spring semester. And we've already started admitting students by that point. And so one of the things that we think is worth looking at is if the foundation could give instead of looking at the end of the fourth quarter, maybe the end of the second quarter, so that the budgets would be available at the start of the academic year, so that the admissions office and the financial aid office can have that budgets and those offers ready to go when we admit students. And again, just like with admissions, this is, yes.
Who controls the actual allocation of those funds? The individual departments or the financial aid office?
I believe it's a financial aid office, but that's a question for.
I think it's a mix, David. I think it's a mix. Some the financial aid controls, but some department heads, Bob, where's Bob? They control as well.
Just make sure that there be consistency in how it's applied across the school.
Yeah. And just like for the missions, I wanted to note this isn't an indictment on Lieutenant Colonel Escom, right? She's new and again found some of the same issues that we found independent of us, and we've already know she's already working on reaching out to revise some of the MOUs. So again, they're aggressive on this, but we're again looking back. It's helpful to kind of just understand where we've been so we can move forward. So just to offer some final concluding thoughts. So just to summarize this. So we know that the applications, whether it's both incomplete and complete applications have been declining to VMI for a decade. And so what we want to just kind of highlight are what are some of the, just from this themes, what are some key things that VMI can really focus on going forward that may be able to help us reverse this trend? And I think first and foremost, the most important piece is aggressively going out and recruiting students, selling them on what does VMI have to offer? What makes us different from other colleges and what makes us different from other military colleges? I know I grew up in Williamsburg, Virginia, and I knew of VMI only because I saw them play Williamsburg football. But other people in my high school had no clue what VMI was about. I remember watching the cadets they scored. That's what I remember as a kid growing up. So I'm well aware of it. But it's not a school that is like a household name everywhere, even in the state of Virginia. So, and there are a lot of interesting opportunities that VMI has to offer. So going out and aggressively selling students on what we have to offer is first and foremost, probably most important. Second is if we can offer financial aid at the exact same time that we offer admissions, that would be a really helpful thing. So make sure we spend all the money that we have and not wait to offer financial aid till several months after we admit them, so that they then get, if they're getting the offer from other schools earlier, that could be a deciding factor as well. Third, we can admit more students into our most popular majors. So just doing, I'm an economist, so looking at demand, supply, and if we have a high level of demand for certain majors, offer the supply for those majors, and it will be something that might be able to be more helpful. And then third is consider offering a general studies major where students may be able to matriculate into a STEM and non-STEM track during their RAT year, and then allow them to take English and history and chemistry and physics, and then by the end of their RAT year, another fourth class year, then they have to declare a major going into their third class year. And maybe we can learn some things from what some of the other military colleges are doing. Going forward, we recommend it's important that VMI adopt a culture of analytics. So this is a term that the chief of staff has used with us repeatedly, culture of analytics. A lot of these issues, have persisted for quite some time, right? So we have a decade of decline in applications. We've had a decade of unspent money. We've had a decade where we go back and looked at where we've gone to visit. And if VMI embraces kind of analyzing data, we'll be able to identify these problems as they occur instead of waiting until there's a crisis. So we could have identified some of these things earlier. And so, but now that where we're at, to make sure we don't have a crisis going into the future, having this kind of a mindset of really making data-informed decisions is something that we really recommend as important. And one of the things that we also recommend is really having somebody that's in charge of data collection, data management, data storage, so that there is some consistency across departments, across posts. That's something that's important. Another thing that we think will be important is adopting internal performance metrics so that we can ensure that there's quality and efficiency within internally at VMI, since we don't have a profit-generating motive. Looking at kind of metrics that we can identify issues in real time. Slide. And one last thing I want to leave everybody with, I think is important, is this isn't just a problem of we had one bad year in matriculum. Forward, right? So from 2007 onward, the national birth rate declined by 20%. Right, so that means starting in 2 years with the matriculating class of 2025, the number of students graduating high school is going to be smaller. Right, and so VMI, along with other colleges, are going to be competing for a smaller group of students, and we need to be prepared for that demographic drop-off that's coming in 2 years. And so as we start thinking about recruitment strategies, as we think about how we're going to move forward, we need to be prepared for the fact that this demographic cliff is on the horizon, and we don't want to make some changes, have a good year or two, and then all of a sudden be back in the problem in a couple of years. So we really think that this is something important. We hope that this report, this presentation has yielded some useful insights, and hopefully this will be helpful in the decisions going forward. But we think that it's important to keep this in mind. If the status quo is going to, may not be the best option that we need to consider to move forward, to adopt and move on.
Yeah, question on I accept at face value the declining birth rate, but I've also heard that for the last quarter century. And while it's true, it's been made up by immigration. And when we look at competitor schools across Commonwealth, a lot of admissions decisions are often based on first generation to attend higher education, things of that nature. I guess I'm going back to the demographic question. Do we anticipate increases in immigration offsetting the lower birth rate? And if so, I guess maybe it's a question for the future. How do you target immigrant families who have no experience with higher education, let alone in the United States, let alone a military background? So I throw that as an open question if you have any thoughts on that.
It's a great question. So during the Great Recession, it was where the 2007, that's where it started. There was a drop in the birth rates during those years of that housing market crash. Immigration is a way, so the national population still continues to grow in the United States despite the declining birth rate because of immigration. I'm not an expert in targeting strategies. I'm sure Lieutenant Colonel Hamby might have some thoughts on that, though.
Yeah. So I think you build relationships directly with those organizations that work directly with that targeted audience. So I'm thinking about the trios, support services programs in the high schools like Talent Search and Upward Bound. And then also transfer population, trio student services at the community college space, because that is a natural landing ground for a lot of those students. So building those relationships and developing those pipelines are critically.
Do you happen to have a number for the percentage of students who matriculate in one major, but then change their major at least once during their cadetship?
We do. We did look at that. We didn't dive into those specifics here.
What is the number?
As far as total, we don't know the total in the core, but we did break it down by major as to which majors are people leaving and which majors are people entering.
Because when I ask cadets in my classes, it seems like it's a number between maybe 40% and a little higher. Enter in one major, but then change to another major. So letting students come in with a year or two, take classes, kind of get their bearings, think about what they're really interested in and where their talents lie is something that more than 90% of the schools and colleges in the country do. So I would think that that would be a very useful thing. Because we have people who come in, everybody can say this, thinking they could do one major, but then they start taking the classes or they start realizing that they need a lot of remediation if they're going to succeed in engineering, et cetera. And with an undeclared major, they've got the time to build up those skills or just to see what other majors are actually like.
I resemble that remark. Well, she makes a great point, and I think what Joe hasn't indicated is, while that's not portrayed here in this briefing, the more expansive study that they've done really talks about that piece of what kids do when they declare what the more popular majors are as they identify their major, come into VMI, and then kind of what that flow is that occurs, right? Some of them migrate out of those majors. So the report that they're preparing is much more expansive, and it talks about that.
Curious, percentages of, wondering if it was hovering about the same.
That was a very useful piece of work.
Yeah.
Good job.
Thank you. Thank you.
Major Murray, I commend you and Colonel Sin for this work. There's a lot of good things in here. I particularly find that scholarship information interesting. I know it's been anecdotally out in the past, so it's good to see it quantified. And the idea is back to the donors and asking them, showing them the data and asking them is a good thing. There's no question that there's a national trend with declining numbers of college students, and we're certainly not immune to that. But if that's all we say, if that's the only conclusion we draw, it's really stopping short. If you look at those declines that you talk about, pretty much half of it occurred in 1 year, last year. Admissions declined 24% in 1 year. Enrollment declined 24% in 1 year. The yield, you mentioned, has declined from 53% 10 years ago to 43%. That decline has only happened in 2 years. So something's going on, and we have an obligation to figure out what that is. We're going to solve the admissions problem. And if we just continue to say, oh, it's national trends, we're not going to solve it. We didn't comment on the demographics of the change. And the RAC class size in 1 year dropped 120 cadets, 24%. Peel that back, one group dropped 119, and that was whites. The number of white matriculants dropped 32% in 1 year. We lost a third in 1 year. Why is that? What are our theories on them? What are we doing from an admissions standpoint to fix that? Hispanics dropped 20% last year. A smaller size group, but 20% is notable. What are we doing about that? What are our theories on why that happened? All other groups were either constant and the kind of normal variations. It may not be comfortable talking about this, but if we simply say, well, it's just part of the national trends. If we look at the 1 year data for our peer schools, what about the Citadel? What about Norwich, Virginia Tech? Did they see a 24% drop? Did they see any drop? What's going on here? We have a specific VMI problem, and it's a 1 year, it's a short year, short-term issue. So please peel that back and ask some tough questions around what's causing that. And let us know what you're doing to fix it, please. It's not simply a long-term trend.
I do got
This is a draft, right? Y'all are gonna go back and
We're still in the process of
in the
working on this.
process, because to me, I mean, we talked a lot about the number of applications, and I clearly, like, that's been going down for a while, but for the last 10 years, we've had, the actual matriculants have stayed the same. And it's been, so y'all could do a study of the last 2 years and what happened there with our number of matriculants. I mean, obviously, number of applications going up would be very helpful. I mean, I'm sure there's many factors. But maybe since this is a draft, maybe y'all can go back and just look at, the last 2 years and show why it was such a drop in not only applications, but actual matriculants. Because that has been, quite a year draft. Just very consistent, like just a straight line across.
Yeah. So just to,
Real quick though, we keep talking about the last 2 years. You said Teddy, but from this chart, I guess maybe I'm missing the point that you're making. You say the last 2. When I see, based on this chart, I see a decline over 10 years. What do you, when you say the last 2 years, what are you referring to?
The number of applicants.
No, applications have declined over 10 years. Now, I get what you're saying, Laura, as far as the admitted and the matriculant. But again, that's been, we back in 2011, we had 2,245 applications. By the time we got to 2019, we were down to 1,634. That's all. That's a big drop, not just the past 2 years.
Lester, I'm not denying that there's a longer term trend and there's a national trend here, but look what happened in the last year.
I get that. No, but I'm saying when you make the statement that it's only the last 2 years, to me, that's a little confusing when you're sitting here looking at this chart. So again, that's basically asking you what's your explanation of when you say 2 years versus 10, as far as decline.
I mentioned the yield dropping just in the last 2 years. The yield's been consistent throughout the rest of the period. There's a national trend. There's a VMI longer term trend. It's undeniable in these declining applications. Something specifically happened last year.
Okay, and I think they've been pretty clear on what they think has happened. But again, like I said, when you say 2 years, this hasn't been a 2 year trend. We've seen this over, like, again, if we go back further, who knows what we find. But this right here clearly says that this is not a 2 year trend. Now, I agree. We need to dig into it and figure out. I think I read somewhere where it said if we don't figure this out, it becomes fatal. So I agree that there's something going on now that we need to address, but this has been something that has been going on for quite some time, and it's apparently never been addressed. And now we find ourselves at a critical inflection point.
I will mention in the years, say, applicants in 2015, 2016, 2017, and I was involved with admissions at the time, and one of the concerns at that time, and they knew that their number of applicants were slowly declining. And one of the theories was that VMI, there's a misconception about how easy it is to get into VMI. Out there, people, it's a military school, you can get in, it's a piece of cake. But the reality is VMI was getting to the point where our acceptance qualifications were just a notch or two below UVA. So what was happening with admissions, and they talked to me about this, is we think we're getting a lot of youngsters that they talk to us, they look at it, they think they're going to get in, and then they realize, shoot, I'm not even close to qualifying for this, and they don't apply. So that was, during those time periods, that was one of the theories. I'm not saying that was exactly what it is, but that, I do know that was somewhat, that did happen in our locality. We were recruiting youngsters, and it's like, look, you're not close.
Let me ask you,
I think you're
Coach, were you going into
my line was if I applied today, like as on a board member, because people would come to me, how's VMI, blah, blah, blah. And I would say, even if I applied today as a woman, I don't think I could get in because the caliber of matriculant has gone so much.
So I got a question though. So like 2018 to 2019.
I'm sorry, could we put the chart up on the screen?
Yeah,
Because we're all talking about it. It's good to have it up.
So from 2018 to 2019, we saw a similar drop in applicants started and applicants completed as we just saw in 21 and 22. Anybody that might have been on the board at that time, was there a conversation about what took place and any kind of solutions to
Good
what,
question.
man? That's again, my point is that this seems to be an issue, and it is an issue currently, but where were we at over the past 10 years with these conversations as we sat here and watched these numbers steadily drop by double-digit percentages?
Yeah, if I have two thoughts on this. One, had the decline, we did have a decline this past year, right? We also didn't have a permanent admissions director prior to that year, right? So that could be part of the issue. Right? We had a acting admissions director. There was some turnover, and that could be part of the explanation. Looking into it doesn't agree, but to that point, had we identified, 5, 6, 7 years ago that there was a decline and worked to increase the number of applicants, had there still been a similar decline, we still would have had enough of the applicant pool to admit students to try to. So, understanding why the applicants have declined is important, but it's also important right now to focus forward as to how do we reverse the trend, right? Understanding what happened and reversing the trend. And I think Joe Hagee is going to speak to that in a couple minutes.
So it's important to note too that what's been done moving forward is this. Now we have a committee that's looking at a 5-year strategic plan to begin to look at admissions, et cetera, 5-year period versus 1 year, 1 year, 1 year. Colonel Wyatt, Shannon Battaglia, an interdisciplinary team across the Institute is now working to look at developing that strategy. So to answer the question, yes, there's a strategy moving forward. It looks over 5-year spans of recruiting, start recruiting those freshmen and sophomores now in high school and targeting them. So that's the work in part of what's being done.
Let me just make a couple of comments specific to some of the things as it pertains to the last 2 years. So it's not only, this understanding has not only been informed by this work. There was a quick look that we got from an independent consultant that came in and looked, and they looked at 5 years, a much more condensed set. And then in addition to that, probably the best way we were going to be able to tell exactly what affected our overall yield, which is the problem. I mean, if even with those numbers in terms of applicants and the high rate of admittance that we were experiencing, you still could have gotten 500. Okay, because we were already admitting just about everybody who had applied. So you could have gotten those numbers. Overall, that's not where we want to be, because we would much rather prefer that the applicant pool to select from is much higher. The best and true way that, these experts around the room have been informing me is whether or not we had a true market analysis that would inform, what caused the 500 kids or so, and in additional kids who chose not to come to VMI, who either applied or considered VMI, what caused them to make the choice to not come to VMI. Did a study of sorts, or a survey of sorts, for that as well, which was led by Lee Rakes. But the return on the information, the response rates, was not high enough to really give us any strong indicators. However, there were some things that were indicated in even the small number of responses. But what wasn't indicated, I can tell you some things that weren't indicated. There was no indication in those responses that people chose not to because of some of the things that we are out there saying or hearing about the school, right? Systemically racist, institutionally racist, woke, teaching CRT. There was nothing in those surveys of substance that pointed to any of those types of things. Oftentimes, what that survey said, those small numbers, was VMI wasn't the #1 choice school for many of these kids. And when they got into their first choice school, they elected to go to the first choice school. So a market. But we do know that we came out of a COVID environment. where a lot of kids were spent their junior and senior year sitting in front of a screen at home. Many of them are now electing to kind of go to a college experience very similar to that. We also know that within our admissions department, where we would ordinarily have had 7 people staffed in there, we went into the last campaign with about 4 people to be the actual recruiters on the ground. So those things have an impact. I think that's why, as we form these Tiger teams and the work that you'll hear coming from Joe and Shannon is about getting out and not only touching the places that we've routinely gone to in the past, doing something more than just relying on open houses to bring our best prospects in, but going out and finding other prospects and also going out into areas that are more populous, but we have been less inclined to go and recruit students.
Major Murray, do you feel like now that we've been through this process, we actually have a good, solid database from which to not just do analytics, but also to manage the operations day to day? And if not, are we moving towards that? Because I think part of what we also discover is metrics are incredibly important. The visibility of those metrics, not just to those running the business, but also to the board, is incredibly important. To Lester's comment, I don't think we had a lot of visibility actually as a board on some of these trends, but maybe talk to that, because do we have more work to do there to get a common database from which to run this as a business, but also report up to the board?
Yes, we do. So in the process of doing this work, we found that there was data that in each department collected and stored with the intent of each individual department analyzing it for their own purposes instead of being shared and analyzed at a holistic view. So we have had conversations with the chief about trying to put together some kind of a team to kind of look at how can we be better going forward at collecting data, analyzing data, storing it so that this can be readily done on a quick, easy basis.
I would assume that's almost as important as some of the other things we just talked about, because data is huge in running this part of the business, I think, Chief. And so it sounds like that's high on the list.
Absolutely, that's a priority, and that's where it starts, right? So that we can look at 5-year trends, 10-year trends, et cetera. So absolutely.
Murray, another trend that occurred between 2016, I would say maybe a little before that, and today, is the introduction of the Common App around the country, and our lack of having that even today. Did you all analyze whether that had any impact on student admissions or on the applications actually?
So that's a great question. We didn't actually analyze it specifically, but one of the recommendations we did make was to consider adopting the Common App. It is so there were a couple things that we did find when we looked at as far as data tracking goes. But for example, when we look at race, right? VMI didn't really track the race of people applying to VMI until this past year. Right, so from the majority of students that we have race data on, it's for matriculants. We know that because they showed up. But for those that applied but didn't matriculate, we don't have a whole lot of information on. We know what their gender is, but we don't know what their race is. And so having data from the Common App would be very useful. So that was a recommendation we made.
This is just for further review. We're talking about, I think Mr. Gottwald talked about the national trends. It's interesting to see what the Virginia trends are, since I think the higher number of matriculates come from Virginia. So that'll be interesting to garner. But when I look at this over the last 5 or 6 years, it looked like for me, Mr. President, I look at this as abandonment rates, because that's, I think about it, sales. We're averaging 400 and some odd folks that are on the green line. But then when we get down to the red line, or to the brown line, that actually came. So that's a huge gap. So the question I would have is, what would offset that abandonment rate from the green line to the brown? Because that's pretty significant. And my question would be, is that relative to other schools from admitted to matriculants? And if not, what could we do to offset that in that regard? Because I'm just curious. That's a huge gap.
Yeah. It's consistent too.
Yeah, that's a huge gap consistently. 440, 35, 50, 535, 505. I'd be interested, because that would tell me a few things. And you're right.
It's consistent from the whole start of the analysis. That abandonment rate, I don't know if that's high, low, Mr. President, or not, but to me, that's opportunity there. But then if we go back, and I'm sure Mr. Hagee is going to talk about it, you get the top of the funnel. But then my last question was looking at where we've gone. It looked to me that we didn't go, and again, the data, let's say it is what it is. We didn't go to a lot of places, and we were successful in harvesting gold we harvested. But then when things changed in those few locations, we were kind of in trouble. So I'm guessing we're talking about expanding. So what would the metrics look like if we kind of got similar penetration rates in some of the other areas? What would that yield rate with? And then should that be, Mr. President, kind of like objectives to kind of get penetration to some of those other two or three high penetration?
This may be a good lead into the next presentation. I'm thinking, actually, let me come back to what Teddy said. Thanks Major Murray and General Senate, the work that's being done, still work to be done, as we said before.
Yeah, let's look at the 10-year trend. Let's look at the 5-year trend.
Yep.
Let's please don't ignore the 1-year trend. And let's don't ignore the demographic drops, the specific demographic drops.
I actually have a question about the demographic information. Is that data that's available from the National Student Clearinghouse? See where, state of where the other students or where the students went? Do they have that demographic information to the extent that it would be helpful for them?
So what we have is, what we did for that is the Student Clearinghouse just has name, college, degree, and we can go year by year and see what they did. But what we could do is we've matched the student from the clearinghouse to the Office of Admissions data to which we can identify some demographic information from. So we can learn where what county they came from, those kind of things. So we could dive in.
Yeah. Joe and Shannon are going to come in and they're going to give us an update on kind of where we are with respect to this year's efforts and the adjustments that's been made in admissions and enrollment campaign.
Yeah. Good morning, everyone. So just want to, you can go to the next slide, to give a brief update on where we're at with our admissions efforts. Before, I think it's important to look at national trends, and Virginia trends mirror what's happening nationally. That helps explain the situation that we're in, and it helps us solidify strategies moving forward on how to get back on track. So obviously there is a U.S. military recruiting shortfall across all branches. We know for a fact for this class that we're recruiting for, class of 27, there's 15 prospects that are in our funnel that have identified that they interested in VMI, but they have chosen to go the enlisted route and have made that decision. So that hurts us, right? When the U.S. military is missing their recruiting shortfalls, they target individuals that are looking to attend senior military college and in a sense, I'm not going to say steal, but students choose to go that route instead of attending an institution of higher education. Secondly, and I think, Mr. Gottwald, this is, I can provide a theory, as you were talking about earlier, with this trend that's happening nationally, as well as what's happening in the state of Virginia. What we're seeing in the 4-year public space and really across the entire higher ed landscape is that college acceptance rates are rising and yield rates are dropping. Specifically with Virginia Tech, their 5-year average is mid-60s. That has risen over the last 10 years, all right? And their yield rate is about 32% over that 5-year span. So again, that yield rate has dropped, that admit rate has risen. JMU is in the mid-70s as well, where their yield rate is in the middle 20%. Citadel, I know was talked a little bit about earlier in looking at our admit rate and our yield rate. And this is just to provide some additional context. First time, first year admit rates. VMI does not have a large percentage of transfer students. To be fair, we haven't really targeted that group of individuals to attend the Institute. I think that we're missing the boat, and we can do a lot of work and will do a lot of work in that space. But if you unpackage the Citadel's admit rate, they admitted this past year about 99% of first-year applicants. Whereas VMI, we were at about 96% or 95%, as presented earlier. So Norwich is about 87% admit rate, and that has been on the rise with a yield rate of about 25%. What is interesting about Virginia, it's simple supply and demand. Virginia is the most competitive state when it comes to the available number of college students, college-age students, and the number of institutions. There's 71 public and private, not-for-profit institutions in the Commonwealth. You look at about 300 or so for-profit proprietary institutions. Liberty University has 100,000 online students. Northern Virginia Community College is what, 30,000 plus, so the largest number of on-campus students. Virginia is a very competitive higher ed landscape. So anecdotally, looking at the number of type of applicant this year for the class of 27, we have seen a very high quality of applicant in terms of GPA, in terms of rigor of courses taken, in terms of extracurricular activities. Okay? Where we aren't seeing in terms of the volume in the funnel is that bubble student, what we'll call them, those that are in that 2.5 to the 3.0 range, and even 2.0 to 2.5, right? There's been a lot of work, and I think that we have to recognize this. That's what's happened across the Commonwealth in the tier space. I know it's currently on the table in the legislature about extending G3, the former governor's initiative, get a job, get a skill, and give back or get ahead of I don't want to say a free college promise program, but the ability to attend college without incurring any debt. So if you divide the Commonwealth into two halves, and you look at the urban crescent, and you look at what's called the rural horseshoe in terms of educational attainment, and sorry to be long-winded, but I want to provide some context. The urban crescent is from Northern Virginia all the way down to Tidewater, and then the rural horseshoe is basically everything else. And if they were if they were separate states, independent of each other, in terms of educational attainment, the urban crescent would be #1 in the United States in terms of educational attainment of completing a college credential. The rural horseshoe would be 51st. So where we have seen the decline, when you look at the competitive nature of the higher ed landscape in the urban crescent, it's simply supply and demand, right? We see an increase in educational choice in the urban crescent. We see labor market implications impacting enrollment in the rural horseshoe. For example, it is not very hard to get a job. And so for those that are on the bubble that we're looking at either attending a senior military college, VMI, enlisting, or going into the workforce, for 4-week, 6-week commitment, whatever have you, it is relatively easy to look at a program at a community college or one of those proprietary for-profit institutions talked about earlier to get a job making $25 to $30 an hour. So that's $50,000, $60,000, $70,000 before overtime. So we are seeing a decrease in that type of applicant in our pool. All right, the higher achievers, they're there, right? And it has made making appointment decisions relatively easy. So I don't think that we can ignore the impact of what's happening in that space, what impact it's having on VMI, as well as other 4-year public institutions in the Commonwealth. Because we're seeing, again, those to meet numbers, admit rates going up, assuming and knowing that yield rates are going down. Bill, if you can go back to the last bit. And so to provide a little bit more context on that in terms of competition, all right? 50% of seniors know where they're applying August 1st. That wasn't necessarily the case because there's a lot of work being done on the front end when they're freshmen, sophomores, and juniors to cultivate those relationships, get them in the funnel, maintain consistent contact, personalize that contact, get the applicant or the prospect to conceptualize seeing themselves at the Institute, right? That's a piece that we are doing work to try to make happen. Right? Form letters, generic emails, that doesn't work anymore. You have to personalize that experience. it's a different type of student that we're recruiting in this day and age. 25% applied to only one college. So if you're not on that 50% radar August 1, you've missed the boat. 75% apply to more than one college. So 25% nowhere. I'm going to VMI. I'm going here. I'm going there, and nowhere else. That's my first choice. And I think I'm going to provide some data later on in the presentation that demonstrates that. I think what's telling, and this is a trend nationally, and Virginia follows suit, 36% apply to 7 colleges or more. 10 years ago, that was not the case. 2, 3, maybe 4. So it is extremely difficult. We are all competing for the same type of student. Now, with that being said, we have to build our database and go after those individuals and those groups of students that have an affinity for a military education. So it's talking about JROTC units in the Commonwealth and nationally, students that attend a military high school, students that come from a military family, students that are interested in STEM, right? So all those, we have to be specific and intentional of how we target those students in our recruitment process, and that's what we're doing currently. More schools are moving tests optional. There is a growing literature base that shows that SAT and ACT are not a better predictor of 1, college preparedness, or 2, college graduation. Cumulative high school GPA is a better predictor of whether or not a student is prepared to enter college. And it's a better predictor of determining whether or not they are more likely to graduate. Which that means, and I think Colonel Rakes talked about it earlier in his presentation, an update about strategic plan, the shift going back to the higher acceptance rates and the lower yield rates, assuming that to meet numbers, is that the shift in the 4-year space, the 2-year space, public, private, it doesn't matter. The shift is focusing more on output rather than input. So instead of trying to find that perfect student and find 2,000 of them to apply, and then get to 1,000 appointments and ultimately 500 matriculants, right? The focus is sort of expanding that reach. And once they matriculate, how will we support them socially? How will we support them emotionally, academically, being proactive in those approaches? So I know that the chief has talked about enrollment management. So it's not about getting them to the institute. It's about what will we do to recruit them, to retain them and graduate them, out sacrificing any of the VMI educational experience that has existed here since the institute was founded. And then finally, the last national trend, as college applications have declined, and we know that to be the case, especially, and I will stand up here and say that I was one of those individuals in the 2-year space that when COVID was going on, we were blasting out emails, text messages, and visits as much as we could, saying, why go to a 4-year school? That experience is not going to be the same because of COVID. Come to a community college, and we saw our enrollment increase, right? So while applications have decreased, there's been a 24% increase in common applications, sir, to your point, 4-year public institutions. So these are data trends that are happening nationally in Virginia that I think really need to drive our strategies moving forward, and will continue to do so, but also help explain kind of where we're at right now. Yes, sir.
A lot of our attention, and rightly so, is focused on the Commonwealth, and some of the points you made were resonating with a question I would have asked the prior group. What about lots of implications to our out-of-state composition or financial, et cetera. And I see where we've done a lot of appropriate research on where do we get cadets in Virginia, where are we not looking? But I think that same analysis applies to the other 49 states. I haven't seen any analysis on that. Maybe we haven't gotten that far. This is step one, but I think to Betty's point about longer term and looking at trends, it's essential for us to pay attention to the out-of-state piece, particularly because part of our value proposition is that we are a national resource that's located in Virginia. And so getting cadets from other states is as essential as it is getting them from other counties in the Commonwealth, in my view.
Agreed, 100%. And we know the Office of Institutional Research has a data dashboard on our website that's accessible by the public. where you can see where we have pulled cadets from for the last 10 years, both in Virginia as well as nationally speaking. We use that information to drive college fairs we're going to attend, where we're going to recruit, where we want to set up new cadet recruiting events, things of that nature. So there is a strong attention to the detail that is being had by the admissions office financially and other areas on post to make sure that we are actively promoting VMI, its value proposition, and the educational experience outside of the Commonwealth.
I think I saw in your Tagger team presentation in October, I saw where it had a national strategy that was overlaid, I believe, with the Alumni Association chapters where there were areas of focus, if I remember correctly. Was that, I remember in that Tagger team assessment.
Correct.
So I think I saw that. That was in October.
Yeah, and just so for example, just within the last 48 hours, I'm working with Brandon Bissell, Director of Alumni Engagement for the alumni agencies, have just scheduled 2 visits to 2 college fairs, collaboration with admissions and alumni in the Fayetteville area, as well as in St. Louis. So I'll talk a little bit more about that as we get into the presentation, but there's a strong attention to expanding the VMI brand and its value proposition outside of the Commonwealth. All right. Go next slide. So just a snapshot of where we're at currently, and this was, the data is as fresh as it possibly can be. This was at 6 o'clock yesterday evening. So my apologies for getting the presentation to you so late. Average GPA of the appointees so far is 3.7. We have appointed, as of, again, yesterday evening, 557 individuals to join the class of 2027. That's about a 19% increase over this point in time last year and tracks closely to previous years. And you can see the breakdown of that class as follows: 83% male, 17% female, 76% white Caucasian, 13% racial minority as a student or an applicant identifying by one race, 4% identify as dual race, and then 7% not reported. If we look down in the yellow box in terms of where we're at, and this is critically important, we have currently 39 reservations, as well as 46 partial reservations. So a reservation is somebody who's paid their deposit, submitted all their post-appointment paperwork, their medical paperwork, it's been approved. Partials, or they've done either or. We can safely assume that we have, unless something unfortunate happens, we can say that we've seated about 19% of our target RAC class of 450 at this point in time. There's always going to be something, somebody breaks a bone or this or that, right? We may defer their admission for a year, but we are in a good position knowing that we've gotten about 19% of our class of 450 for the fall.
Is that, real quick, is that similar to what we've seen in the past, percentage-wise, or is it?
No, sir, we're ahead. And I think part of that is the intentional proactive strategies that we put in place in terms of drip campaigns. I'll talk more about it here in a second, since 31 October. But no, we are well ahead in that area.
Question for you.
Yes, sir.
First, privately, you probably have some stretch goals with your team. I know this is, I would do the same thing. This is tiring, but I'm assuming you got some stretch goals, overachievement goals with.
We do. Yes, sir. We do. We do. We have to see in a second when we look back at the funnel. We need to be realistic about volume in, and I'll talk about the Major Murray talked about our partnership with EAB, or the sophomore junior lead generation relationship that we have with them.
Dude, don't get me wrong, I wasn't asking you to overcommit. I understand how that works, but I was just saying back pocket stretch goals you probably have with the team, I'm assuming.
Yes, sir.
One question real quick, early decision, those applications have to be in by November 15th, and then their decision made by December 15th. Were the number of applicants for early decision, was that, do you know if that was on par with previous years?
We were as of yesterday evening, I think we were about 4% or so, 5% over what we were at this point in time last year. So we've seen an increase in early applicants. And 80% of those partials and reservations are from early decision applicants. So we've seen that increase.
So that
oh, sir, yes.
No, I just want to clarify. So I think what you're asking was, were the early decision applications consistent with previous years, more or less?
They were more than last year, less than previous years.
I guess I'm just looking at that early decision because those are those youngsters that this is predominantly where I want to go. They're very focused, get an application in. So how did last year's compared to previous years? Might be something we want to look at. I don't think that answer.
Yes, sir. So interesting enough, early decision doesn't necessarily mean what it did 10 years ago, where going back to that slide, about 36% apply to 7 or more schools. You have in Virginia and nationally students applying early decision to multiple schools.
Okay.
So we still have to compete and fight and win that student. What we have left in the funnel as of last night, and again, we are seeing as we're moving forward with appointments, that volume is more or less staying the same. So we have a good steady stream of folks applying to the Institute and moving forward. 32 completed files ready for review. Those are the completed applications that Major Murray talked about earlier. 6 deferrals from the fall that we will review for a spring appointment. 301 incomplete files. So these are students that started their application but haven't completed it. 140 applications started, and then 305 post-view accounts that have not started the application for 790 that are currently in the funnel. We have conversion goals at every step. You'll see that on the next slide that we're hitting or close to hitting those goals. There's one area that we're not, and I have a theory as to why that will be mitigated and we will eliminate with the addition of our CRM. But I'll wait till we get that slide to talk a little bit more about that. Next slide, sir. So looking at admissions data, comparing where we're at this day in juncture as compared to previous 3 years. It's important to note, if you take a look at the number of increase, a good healthy ratio to seat a class is to have an 80-20 mix. And what I mean by that 80% would be from paid lead generation. So using vendors such as EAB and whatnot to find students for you, add them into your funnel, and then room and build those relationships and ultimately drive them to apply, enroll, curriculum, whatever have you. And 20% would be from organic sources. So this is from boots on the ground operation. These are from college search websites, those that have hand raisers for VMI, such as Niche, College Raptor, CapEx, right? Those would be organic increase. Those that raise their hand and submit an inquiry form through our website. All these would be what we consider to be organic. So right now, we're at a ratio of about 90 to 93% paid as a 7 to 10% organic. So that explains why, or helps explain why the number of applicants are down. We need quality volume. We have increased the number of paid leads that we put into the top half of the funnel, but you can see that the number consistently goes down because we're not getting quality volume. I'll talk about strategy here in a second. What I do want to point out is while we are struggling, or while we have struggled to get inquiries back up, and we are changing our strategy pace, we're converting at higher rates and at rates that rival historic norms. So the conversion rate from inquiry to post-view account, that's that next step in the process, is about 10.7, 10.8%. Last year was about 8.5%. And so if you kind of do the math, numerator, denominator, and you look at, year 25, 24, you'll see that it's about 10.5 or 10.8%, 10.7%, somewhere around there, right? If you take a look at apps started versus app completed, we're converting at a rate of about 85%. Our goal is 90. That's our goal for the end of this cycle, is to get 90% of those to start the application to complete. Last year, that rate was at about 60-some%. Okay. So we're doing what we can to work the funnel. And we've executed drip campaigns or lost point campaigns since 31 October to make that happen. Ultimately, what you can see here is we start to level out with appointments where we're at 557 as compared to 471 at this point in time last year, which is more or less in alignment with years prior.
Are you concerned about the completed apps, where we are at this point in time?
No, sir. My biggest concern, and being brutally honest of where we're at in the funnel, the biggest loss point is from post-view account. That's the step that you have to complete before you can actually start your admissions application. We're converting at a rate of about 74, 75%, where our target's 90. It is difficult to complete the application to VMI. There's multiple steps, and there's a lot of research and data that exists across the board, but specifically with underrepresented populations, that if an application is hard to complete, an individual is more likely to just, never mind, it's not the institution for me, and just move on to the next one. That problem takes care of itself with the addition of our CRM, which I'll talk about on the next slide, where we will have an application. Our primary application will be on the website. It will be one click to apply to VMI, and we will have a secondary application available through the Common App.
It looks like that conversion rate from post-view to application started has really dropped off this year. Thoughts on that?
It has. We went with a new post-view system, and the way that you apply changed. I was not here last year, so I can't assess what that looked like for an applicant. What I can say is that the feedback that we've received and the numbers support the feedback that we've received is that it is more difficult to apply to VMI than it is to other institutions. So that's why we're converting at higher rates and more historically norm rates in other areas of the funnel, as opposed to this one, where we're at about 75% and our target's 90.
So Joe, in addition to CRM, how much would going to a Common App help that?
So it's going to break down a barrier. So it's going to break down a huge barrier in accessing the VMI application. So you saw the statistics, sir, 24% increase in the 4-year public space. When you log into the Common App, we will have a series of questions that are specific to VMI. But it's going to basically, almost like filling out the FAFSA, where you submit one FAFSA application, but you can send it to 10 schools. Now you have the ability in one session to apply to multiple institutions. So the intent would be that we would drive up as we branch out in Virginia, as we branch out nationally, to be able to drive up the number of applicants to VMI.
Just because I haven't applied to college for a while, what's the order of operations? Is it Common App, VMI application, or is it the VMI app?
It's both. It's simultaneous. So 80% of schools that are on the Common App have their own application, a primary application. The Common App is secondary. So we could keep our system as is and move to the Common App. The reason why we didn't last year, my assumption is, and again, I was not here, is that we did not have an admissions infrastructure to support that volume being added at the top half of the funnel. Because you're talking about potentially adding thousands of applications, and if you don't have the infrastructure to support it, now you've created more problems than you solve. So
what's the cutoff date for?
So we say our priority deadline is February 1. We state on our website that applications received after that are going to be reviewed on a rolling basis.
Well, this data shows that had fewer applications started last year, fewer applications completed than last year. What's your view on where we're going to end up?
I think I understand what you're saying. I feel that the rate at which we are converting, and again, we could look at that loss point between post-view account created and app started and see that we're not converting at as high of a rate as we are at the other areas, right? completely understand that. But if you look at the conversion rates and compare them to where we were last year, I feel confident that we're going to meet our goal. I do. I know my team is working hard. We have folks across posts that are involved in our efforts. We have alumni that are involved in our efforts that are volunteering. Hey, I'll go here, I'll go there, and working with Brandon Bissell to sort of make that happen. But I'm confident that we're going to get there. I mean, would I like to see 4,000 post-view accounts created? Would I like to see 3,000 applications started? Absolutely. But I'm confident based on the conversion rates that I'm seeing that we're going to hit our number.
What conversion rate are you talking about?
Conversion rate of, again, comparing it with like historic norms. If you look at the apps increase the post-view account. So increase, we start with about 100,000 to 105,000 in the top half of the funnel. From that, names that we purchase or folks that we add in, we get down to about, for this year, 12,000 inquiries. When we look at that next step, so a prospect is a name that we purchase, a name that we secure via whatever the method is. An inquiry is what we call a hand raiser. So this is somebody who says, I want to learn more about VMI. We got 12,442 of them. If you look at them taking that next step beyond being a hand raiser and taking an active step towards applying to the Institute, we're converting at a rate of about 10.7%. That is higher than what we were converting at this point in time last year at that same data point. And it is in alignment with the conversion rate for the class of 25 and the class of 24, which I believe were 10.8 and 10.9% respectively. And it's just numerator to denominator. When I look at the conversion rate of app started versus app completed, same thing. We're converting at a rate of 85%. Last year, 70% or so, maybe high 60s. Our target is 90, and that's where we're going to be in April or so. But we're converting at a high rate. So that's why I say that I feel confident that we're going to hit our recruitment goal.
I hate to stay on this, but I'm looking at the applications completed. Those numbers are as of the 26th of January, all right? So if I look at the total number of applications we got over those years, not substantially higher than where we are January 26th.
Understood. And again, I go back to the conversion.
Completed applications do you expect us to get?
Right. That's a great question. So if you go back and look at the last 5 years, after February 1st, we get about 5 to 15% of our total applications for that admission cycle are completed after February 1. So really, we're playing in the margins after that date. Why I say that I'm confident that we're going to hit our numbers is, one, the conversion rates, but two, the strategies that we put in place. And then there is a new strategy. It's a joint effort with communications and marketing and admissions, and really paid for by Colonel Wyatt and his team, in a mid-yield campaign that is a dual strategy to get last-minute applications and folks into the funnel, as well as to drive those that are already in the funnel that have been appointed to pay their deposit, enroll, matriculate. So there's things that are happening at that last point, data point that you see listed, that we are converting at higher rates. Again, that next step is going back to the number of partial appointments, partial reservations, and full reservations, where I say that I feel confident that we're going to hit our target.
So Joe, you're not that under this yield campaign, you're not saying that you really expect that we're going to get this groundswell of last minute applications, right? There are some things that you all are doing that is more targeted. For example, the rosters and the lists of the kids that applied to service academies that won't get in. That's a point of targeting. Kids that might not have gotten into another college, kids who have now applied for and are recipients of ROTC scholarships that might not have been on your radar, that becomes a point of target.
Yes, sir.
Is that essentially what we're talking about?
Yes, sir, that's correct. Yes.
And the yield campaign is really designed to get us from that 43% where we were last year back up to that 50%. So there's a lot going on in admissions, Department of Communications and Marketing. It's never been done. A lot more touches going.
So to compare apples to apples, what you're saying is if you look at this chart we were all looking at earlier, you're thinking this line is going to be significantly up.
Our target for, in terms of appointment, is going to be is 1,011. So we want to be over 1,000. We were at 897 last year, right? Being realistic about volume in the funnel, we can convert at higher rates. We can, change strategy in terms of personalizing the appointment to VMI and conceptualizing appointments, seeing themselves here. We can do all of that, but we have to be realistic about volume that exists in the funnel, and that die had been cast. I want to be clear that that 12,442 number, 90% of those are names that were entered into the funnel last year when students were juniors, or 2 years ago when they were sophomores. So the volume, and you see that number trend, and that weekly report is added into the box folder, I think, for the Academic Affairs Committee. When you see that number tick up, those are organic inquiries that were added. And since 1 December, we've added 536, which doesn't seem like a lot, but that is slightly better than we had been in previous years, not just last year, right? Relatively speaking, that is better. And that's because we've had more of a boots on the ground effort, which I'll talk about here in the next slide.
We got to wrap up, so if you could get through the next slide and then let Shannon get to the slide real quick.
So a few things that I want to highlight here that you can see on your presentation. I'm happy to take questions later. Implemented or completed. Select CRM. We have the demo different products. We selected one that was specifically designed for the higher ed landscape. It's Element 451. Selection of our new vendor for sophomore junior search. So moving forward with Spark 451, which will actually provide a better return on investment in terms of individuals matriculating to the Institute. They have a different methodology that they use. By shifting there in that space, we're going to save the Institute about $200,000 a year. So again, providing a better return on investment. Implemented our new texting platform. We sent 13,000 texts out to applicants since December. We have submitted our non-binding letter of intent for the Common App, which we will begin that August 1. Shifting down to recruitment yield, I want to highlight the 130 cadets that participated in cadet furlough recruiting. The reestablishment of our partnership with the Black College Expo, the National College Resources Fair, attending the seven events this spring, and we'll have a similar number in the fall, as well as a new fair schedule, Infinite Scholars, which is, again, looking at providing access to learning about VMI to historically underserved and underrepresented populations. Our Call of Duty Scholarship, which since we started communicating 16th December, had 240 applications. Drip Camp talked about since 31 October. And then you can kind of see the rest of the updates as well from marketing, enrollment marketing, and then some changes with staffing and personnel. Colonel Wyatt, next slide. Colonel Wyatt talked briefly about it, but our Admit Yield campaign is a two-pronged approach. Allied Pixel Video, this is what Colonel Wyatt talked about in terms of driving those that have been appointed to the Institute to ultimately deposit, enrolled, and matriculate. Boost display ads, we created lookalike campaigns based on an individual's affinity to attend a military college. Again, those lookalike campaigns, geofencing, things of that nature to try to get last minute applicants to the Institute.
Question, sorry, I know we're
Yes, ma'am.
over. We talked about these guaranteed admissions agreements and we talked about Common App next year. Read something about, I think it was direct admissions, basically admitting people who meet a certain probably GPA without them to apply. Is that something we're looking at?
So they still have to apply, but if they meet certain criteria, and that criteria was reviewed by the dean, the commandant, his staff, the superintendent, the chief of staff, financial aid, registrar. If you meet that criteria, we will guarantee you admission to the institute, not necessarily to a major. So we've executed an agreement with Fork Union, Military Academy, Massanutten Military Academy. Hargrave is ready to sign. That will be sent today or Monday next week. Benedictine is looking at, and they will move forward with an agreement for VCB as well as St. Gertrude's. And we've executed an agreement with Marine Military Academy in Texas. There are two on the table right now that we're discussing. These are two military high schools in Pennsylvania.
Go ahead, Shannon, real quick, if you don't.
Short and sweet.
Pressure.
So this number, unlike some numbers that you'll see, financial aid is always fluid. So that's because we get FAFSAs in every single day, and then we're processing them as we receive them. So the 120 is the incoming class of 2027. That's how many financial aid offers have been established. That is even incorrect data as of right now, because of course we're still doing that. The big thing with financial aid changing is historically here at VMI and in higher ed, when you apply for admissions, you apply for financial aid, you register for classes, and you kind of go to school, right? That's been the breakdown. So the big thing with financial aid and admissions working together is making that a parallel process. So you don't have to be appointed or apply for admissions at VMI to know what financial aid you could be receiving. We know they're full-time. We know that they put us on their FAFSA, so they're interested in some regard of coming to VMI, and so we're targeting them as well. So the ones that maybe send us a FAFSA, but don't apply for admissions or haven't yet done that process, my office is reaching out to them saying, hey, this is great, we have this. Now you need to go do this part. And so we're using that as another way to help recruit in conjunction with the admissions team. Big goals that are not up here, and I'll keep it as short and sweet as I can. Working really closely with the foundation and the alumni agencies, and helping make sure we exhaust the funds that we have from them, from our donors. Part of that is going to be changing how we get those awards out. So I would much rather see donor A's name out on an offer letter right now versus us replacing that, swapping that money out after the fact. It's going to get the donors' names out to those potential families in advance, which I think will help those relationships, but also it's going to help those students feel like they want, VMI wants them if it's a named scholarship versus a generic scholarship dollar amount. But those are the big pieces on top of just automating processes within the office. Any questions?
Seamless process now, isn't it?
We're getting there. FAFSA's got a lot easier over the years. You can do it on your cell phone now and all of it. But I'm working very heavily with Joe's team, with academics and athletics to help with them with recruiting.
And how about the DoD? Are you coordinating with Department of Defense to get that extra year of scholarship money available for ROTC?
So as best as we can do that. We're really at the mercy of them communicating with us who is getting those scholarships. And so that process nationally is slow. It's a slow process, and there's not much I can control with that. But to Joe's point of, if they know they're not getting into another school and we know they have that ROTC scholarship, we're going to go after them and say, here, we want you here. And then here's what we can offer you in conjunction.
With the PMS, this is pretty good. Come on,
with him, yep. So financial aid wise, I can only control so much when they tell me that they have it. So, but improving communication earlier and making sure we're nudging them in conjunction with admissions. So.
One of the things that I hope you see and can appreciate is this synchronization, this culture change we've implemented with financial aid and admissions and marketing. Bill was gracious enough to give us one of his best employees to join this team. And so it's been an intentional effort for synchronization. I think that plays out, informed by data and experiences and personal relationships as well. So I think we're making some progress towards this sort of culture to really meet the needs of this changing student population. It's very different from maybe when we went to school. So I think we've got a very solid team with this moving forward.
Okay.
Thank you, Richard. Cedric, do a little planning here. One thought would be, other than career services, everything that's following actually is going to, we have a committee meeting that centers around those. Would it make some sense to try to think about having those few pages actually brought into the committee meeting rather than sort of get too further
No, I think so. We've got 5 left, already over time. And so I definitely think if your desire that allow these other conversations to take place.
If I could just ask the committee chairs, if that's all right, maybe modify your agendas a little bit and pick up the pieces here that we didn't get to. But on the other hand, we don't have career services, I don't think, embedded in any of the committees. So maybe we actually, if that's okay with everyone, we'll push the committee level with the exception of career services.
Okay, good. Ahmad, you're up. Be the last brief.
Well, an alibi, like audible.
No, it was excellent conversation. So hopefully you can see, we're not trying to shortchange the discussion. These were incredibly important topics. And so maybe this is the way that would maybe get us, try to get a little closer. Welcome, thank you.
Thank you very much. Good morning, everybody. I'll keep it short. Before I do begin, though, I do want to recognize Smith Hall in general. I'll get emails. General Wins will go and he'll speak at some organization and he'll collect business cards for some reason. Then he'll send them to my office to follow up. And these efforts have real impact on students. Dean Marashi as well. A lot of support for career services. Career outcomes have become a role for every individual who works at VMI. So I appreciate that. Just to give you an example of that, General Wins spoke at DEFCON this past summer. Made some contacts. I get to hear about it. I get an email. I follow up. And a week later, DEFCON, by the way, is the U.S. Army Combat Capabilities Development Command. I get a call. They came out, met our faculty members. There's a talk about doing research, partnering, creating the pipeline. And as of 2 weeks ago, they've hired 8 of our cadets, 4 for the summer internships coming up 2023. And 4 for a full-time hire, and that wouldn't have happened. Made those 2, so thank you very much for that. We appreciate that, and Dean Marashi as well. Thank you for your support. But today on the agenda is for the class of 22, the career outcomes. Our cadets are in high demand. They graduate. Any student that wants a job or a career has one on the way out. Not wants that. Which is understandable. You have a family business, you want to travel the world. So there might be a couple of students here and there that may choose that route, but everybody else is well placed. So if you want to go to the next slide here for me. Class of 22, there were 230 students that commissioned and 110 of them accepted full-time jobs. So it's about 60-30% ratio, 60% commissioning, 30% or so, 28.6 exact, are taking full-time jobs with 8.6% or 9% choosing graduate education. Because of COVID, especially our athletes were eligible for 1 more year of NCAA, and that's why average usually is about 4%, but this academic year, it went up to 9%. So that is great to see that our students are seeking graduate education. And about 3 students as of October 31st. That's the cutoff time frame. The goal is that every single cadet is tracked. Myself and my team put a lot of work into calling, emailing, spying on LinkedIn, Facebook, and whatever it takes to gather that data. So only 1% of them were seeking employment at that time. I will say this, the national trend is that it's just the new young people, I guess. You take a job June 1st, and 33% of them are looking for a new job by September. They didn't like that boss, they didn't like that site. Not 5 every day, 5 days a week, I'm gonna have to do this. So that can happen. So sometimes we call in September, they're like, I'm looking for a job, but they may not mention they already have one, but they're looking to make another move. That's 33%, and 65% of young people do not stay in their role beyond their first year of employment. So for a career service perspective, we're looking about career development, not just a job placement, and that people, college degree from VMI, semi-reasonable GPA can get a job. Yes, that's not a problem. But we're focused on more of a long-term planning to making sure that they start off strong and they know what they're doing for the next 5 years. And after that, next, right? What they want to do with their life, and mortgages come into play, marriage comes into play, and so on and so forth. So, and our research data that we do collect comes from registrar's office and the NACE salary survey that we choose to get that information from. Next one, please. Same information, just in a different format for our audience here in this room. 28.6% commissioning, and then 2%. And then commissioning, the red one, yellow is the employed, which is 28.6%, and then 9% went to graduate school. Next one. Some of our employers that our students are going to: Amazon, Bank of America. I'm not going to read off all of them, but Deloitte is a big part of it. Department of Defense, Fidelity, Johns Hopkins Applied Physics Lab, Lockheed Martin, Military Sealift Command, Naval Air. So that's a good list of employers, and they find us oftentimes. They are ready to recruit. It's on their calendar. We have a career fair every fall, a career fair every spring. So this spring, February 14th, is our engineering only career fair. It'll be hosted in the library, and we're full. We're booked. Engineering department is ready, and most of the students that want jobs for May 1st or May 16th or June 1st, they already have jobs. And this fair will be focused on more internships. Last few years, our focus has been, let's get every student an internship, even if you're commissioned. Army likes it to see these young people having industry experience in their college years. So that's our focus. Next one, please. And here's a list of where our students went for graduate school. On the top are the top 25 programs in the country. And then below that are the top 75 programs in the country. And our students go, most of them stay in Virginia, but a lot of them will go to North Carolina, is another hot spot for our students. Some may end up in Texas. So our students are going all over the place after they graduate from here in pursuit of graduate education.
And these are full-time students?
Yes, ma'am. Absolutely. Yeah.
Is there any tracking of who goes to graduate school, 3, 5, 10 years out?
So that would be more of an alumni question. For us, it's the initial first destination. As you leave VMI, where are you going? So we'll have some, or most, or 60% commissioning, jobs. We'll have few that go to their family business. And then we have some that disappear. They'll confirm nor deny. They're working for the CIA or the NSA. So that we're talking in the career fair, CIA recruits the VMI. And then these students will say, I'm very interested. We get them connected. Our commandant, he would host the CIA, FBI recruiters in his quarters. We appreciate that support. And then that student disappears. We don't hear from them. We don't know. So hopefully they're getting money from the alumni agency. That's all I hope for. They're supporting faculty research and the scholarships, hopefully. So.
Talent Pathways is a thing for the Youngkin administration as well, and desire to get college graduates to remain in the Commonwealth. And so I think one of the things we can help ourselves with are some of these MOAs that we have with some of the other colleges that currently have programs for our students that will allow them to stay. I think the other point that has been discussed routinely with the Council of Presidents is that even among the competition that we were talking about earlier with undergrad students, they are also seeing, Chev is seeing that adjoined states, North Carolina principally, I think Tennessee, they are doing various different things to try to entice kids in Virginia to come across the state line to go to school in North Carolina, so much so that they're doing things like offering them the opportunity in-state tuition to go to come out of Virginia to go to school in North Carolina. So that's something that continues to be watched as well.
And just if I may add also, we're able to collect data on 99% of our graduates. And nationally, folks that are doing it correctly, they don't go above 60%. So our students remain attached to VMI. We're able to reach out. Sometimes a couple of them will be tough to reach, and we'll reach out to their faculty members. Some of them have relationships that way, and we're able to collect that information for, and it also helps for recruitment, right? Like at 11 o'clock today, I'm meeting with our football perspective of cadets, and I'll be speaking with them about career pathways and career outcomes as part of VMI journey. So this has real impact on enrollment as well. And we have a very strong partnership now with admissions, with the athletic coaches to make sure our enrollment is where it needs to be. Next slide, please. A couple of slides I have on our athletes. Our athletes are a big part of our VMI story. So I thought it's important to have that information. Well, this class of 2022 athletes. I screwed that up on the top there. But 53 athletes graduated, and we were able to collect data from 98% of them. Only one athlete we could not track, right? We couldn't find him. He disappeared. But 41% of them commissioned, 15 of them accepted full-time jobs with an average salary of 56. Average salaries are tough to track. You may have engineers that make 100 grand a year, and then you may have some other majors, liberal arts perhaps, that might be a lot lower than that. So the average salary does not tell the whole story, but our national average for our salaries are much higher than the national average. And then 15 of them. A lot of our athletes, I believe last year and this upcoming year, will be looking at graduate school because of the NCAA. They missed out for 1 year of playtime. So next slide, please. Same information, just in a more graph situation there, but that's all I have. I'm happy to take any questions you may have for me. Yes, sir.
I'm going to offer a comment, and it's a complete Captain Obvious point, but I feel like I want to say it. So during the admissions discussion, we talked a lot about national trends, and we have to pay attention to national trends. I get that, right? One of the things I heard you say was, you know, a lot of kids, there's demand for employment. Some of them are deciding, I'd rather go get a job than go to college. I'll be honest, I think they're making a good call in some situations. I question higher ed today in a lot of ways, but I just think we're different. And I just encourage all of you, while you're paying attention to national trends and trying to compete in the national way, we win because we're unique. And I just think for everybody involved, keep that in mind. And your comments, I mean, the special part of this place is sometimes hard to describe, but just look at our admission, who we admit, look at our employment data, look at the income of our graduates at 5 and 10 years. You should win that conversation with anybody. And so I encourage you to keep an eye on just how unique and special this place is. And everybody, and it starts with the superintendent, should be preaching that everywhere we go. That's how we're going to solve this admissions problem. So, sorry, felt the need to say it.
Well said. It's also part of our retention story, right? This is why people should want to stay, is that this is exactly what you have at the end of your tenure, right, actually, as well. So I think, Cedric, that's part of very much what you talk about retention, whether it's athlete or non-athlete. That's a big part of the messaging. This diploma is worth quite a bit more. That's a good close, John. Thank you. Any further questions?
Thank you very much.
Thank you for your time.
Thank you. And again, I hope that change of format for the next, using this material in the committee's works. I know we would prefer to have the time to go through it now, but
Sure enough, so you can short change.
Sure.
That good with everybody?
Yep. Yes, sir.
All right. Any final comments? Otherwise,
I know a lot of the right areas, right?
Absolutely.
It's enrollment.
Thank you.
Financial aid, those things that we've continued. Thanks.
The committee meetings, then we'll meet up again, and then the aquatics. Thank you. Thanks, everybody.
Yeah, sure, please do.
Earn you carrying a.
Unless you know where.
I am.
Extra.